As I got closer to God through genre and rigorous study, as I worked on my personal relationship with Heavenly Father, and I think strengthened it. Do you know what I found? The more you know, the less you know. And by the time I was 50, I was malnourished from the fast food of religion I'd been packing into my brain for the best part of a decade. Every sect, cult, creed, and denomination all claimed to be the one true doctrine, and yet none seemed true when held under the microscope. So I wondered what else was out there. I promise you, the last thing I wanted to do was find the one true religion. But unfortunately, I did.
We interrupt this program to bring you...
All right, everybody, my name is Kevin.
And my name's John.
And we are The Real Movie Guys, and welcome back to another episode of The Real Review, the series where we review and discuss all your favorite movies. And don't forget, if you like what you see here and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe to the channel today. On today's episode, we're taking a look at Heretic. Two young religious women are drawn into a game of cat and mouse in the house of a strange man. John, A24 never disappoints lately with their movies. Either I'm completely blown away or I'm moderately satisfied. And Heretic actually kind of landed on the latter for me. Seeing Hugh Grant in a horror movie, I don't know how it could have disappointed. But actually, even beyond that, this movie really exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, and speaking of Hugh Grant in particular, I think it was a great opportunity for him to show off a lot of charm and you know, he really got to act in the movie, which was great to see. It was really fun.
And it's funny for Hugh Grant because I feel like he's in a stage of his career where he really just doesn't care about making movies. He recently just showed up in Dungeons and Dragons almost as a joke, I think, just to people, just to be like, I'm doing this movie, I'm getting a paycheck and just having a great time. Heretic actually didn't seem like that. Actually, it seemed like he was really intrigued and interested in making this movie. And it shows from his performance and it shows from the product that we got. I was blown away by this. But what I really want to say is, what is this movie, right? I think that's probably the biggest thing that we can actually discuss about it. Heretic is a movie I like to describe as like your uncle coming to your house on dinner and having a very serious religious discussion and you guys going back and forth debating. That's essentially what this movie is in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it has the... maybe somewhat escalated, but similar sense of growing unease as the conversation goes on.
Yeah, it's like someone's about to stand up at the table and start fighting each other at some point over their beliefs. But it's funny because what this movie really is, when you really just sit down and boil it down, before you get to the latter act of this movie, it's really just talking, right? And I couldn't have been more enthralled by it. I think it was one of the most beautifully written thrillers I've seen in quite a long time on a psychological level and a theological level as well. It was just very intriguing.
I think it's kind of interesting the way that you said in the latter section of the movie, because you know they usually say third act sort of structure, 3-act structure, but really this movie has the first half or the first set act and then act 2. And they're very different, but I agree with you 100%. The first act or the first segment of the movie is mostly discussion between the 3 main characters, and I thought that they all played their role well as sort of well, we didn't talk yet about the characters in particular, but the 2 young women kind of playing different roles in the conversation against Hugh Grant. I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, and again, this movie thrives with that, and those are always my kind of favorite psychological thrillers when we have those kind of movies, when you have a very small cast. Realistically, there's 3 people. There's a 4th person in this movie, which happens to be Topher Grace. I don't know why he's in this movie. I thought that was just hilarious, seeing him show up randomly, and he's kind of a plot point that you need just for like a second. Again,
Right.
I don't wanna
Somebody
spoil
had to
it,
play
so.
the role, so it might as well be him.
Yeah, why not? Why not for Topher Grace random in here? But the three leads, I mean, they're phenomenal. Chloe East plays Sixter Paxton, and Sophie Thatcher, who plays Sister Barnes. They go to meet Hugh Grant in this movie to try and equip him to their Mormon religion, to try and to have him join them. And from the moment they enter his house, this movie just is like a roller coaster ride of thriller emotion. And it's really just them stealing the show, just, again, having a discussion. And this movie just really makes it interesting. I can't stress that enough. Well, a lot of people enjoy this movie for what it is. I don't know. I could see people looking for action. I don't think this is the movie for them. But if you're just looking for a genuine discussion, I think that it really is there as far as this film.
Yeah, and I think even though the action doesn't really come into play until the latter half,
Right.
I do think that they do a good job of making you progressively more and more uneasy and giving you smaller revelations as to what might be going on in this house as their evening goes on. So
Right.
yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and it's true, because Hugh Grant, again, from the moment we meet him, it's just something is off. And the whole movie is done extremely well as far as using sound design, which I think is a very underrated feature in this movie. The house, there's like a metal tinge to the house, and it's played off quite well throughout the whole entire movie. Not even just that, the sense of spacing, the cinematography in this movie is absolutely beautiful. Again, you're not playing with much space either. A lot of the movie really only takes place in 2 or 3 rooms ultimately, and then there's a couple of crazy things that happen towards the end, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But again, just to utilize the space that you have in this movie and to make it that much of a thriller needs to be commended. It really does. Between just the performances, sense of atmosphere, this movie has everything. Where it starts to falter, in my opinion, I think there is a discussion for it towards the end of this movie, which I did actually have some issue with how they kind of came to the ending and some of the justifications for things. But ultimately, the discussion of religion and a different person's beliefs and how they come to their beliefs versus someone else, how they come to their beliefs, who's right, who's wrong. Again, I think it's just it's a very intriguing conversation that this movie turns into a horror thriller, which, again, you got to give it its comeuppance for that, for sure.
Yeah, and I also had somewhat of a problem in the latter half of the movie. I wonder if it's the same one.
Right.
Although I think we'd have to get into a little bit of a spoiler discussion to
Right. And I think
have that conversation.
Yeah, and we've talked enough generalizations, I really think, at this point. I want to just say I do recommend you do watch this movie and then maybe come back to the second half of this video just to see what we had to say. There's a lot here to enjoy, and the spoilers kind of do take it away a little bit. Not knowing is one of this movie's greatest assets. Once you've seen how the sauce is made, sometimes it's a little less intriguing. So I think you should watch this and then come back. But you just know from this point forward is kind of where we're going to dive into spoilers. So you'll see a little bit of a warning. Come back, enjoy us, and then we can give you our score at the end here. But, all right, John, let's go into spoilers, because I know you want to talk about. What do you want to talk about? You kick this off. What's the main thing for you right here?
And you can stop me if this is the same thought that you were having.
Okay.
But toward the second half of the movie, you're led to believe that one of the young women, Sophie Thatcher's character, has died, right?
Right.
So you're left with a sort of one-on-one confrontation between Chloe East's character and Hugh Grant's character.
Right.
Up until this point, Sophie Thatcher has been the rational one, the one kind of trying to help her friend who seems a little more naive, a little bit less aware of what could be happening to them, less aware of the danger that they're in.
Right.
Kind of having to be guided through this whole situation.
Right, and there's a lot of scenes of that early on too, when they meet like a bunch of people and they make the was it the underwear reference or whatever, that they like pants her and stuff like that. But she wants to still be friends with them. Again, like you said, they do allude to that a lot through the movie.
Yes, and it was very shortly after her friend, you believe, has died, that instantly she can figure out what's going on. She becomes empowered, and she has taken on the mantle, and she will be the final girl, right?
Right.
In a horror movie,
sure,
sort of setting. To me, I still enjoyed the movie as it went on, and it did have additional twists. but I was just like, who am I watching now? This is not the same character that we had watched in the first half of the movie. And it just seemed like such a shift. And I wasn't really sure what the thinking was behind that.
Right, and I do feel like it's a kind of a dramatic evolution out of nowhere, because like you said, we're led to believe one character's super strong-willed, and there really is no evidence of Sister Paxton kind of being this tough girl, even having it in her. It almost feels like she was like a super nerdy girl, which they allude to with all her comic book references, which I thought were hilarious. There was like a Swamp Thing reference in this movie. I'm like, really? A Swamp Thing reference? That's what we're going with? Even the Spider-Man reference I thought was funny for Topher Grace there. Great power comes great responsibility. But yeah, it's very strange that she ends up being the final, which I don't mind. I don't mind there being subverting expectation, there being a final girl. But I do kind of wish there was more, like a little more to her character, like leading up to that, like other than just like a dramatic rebirth, which I guess you could argue falls into some symbolism of religion, like you're kind of baptized in your like rebirth of becoming a new person to survive this situation. Again, that's super stretch, Kevin, like looking for it and just trying to pull it out of the weeds.
It's interesting.
There could be something there.
Yeah.
I do agree, and that actually leads to one of my problems with the movie. So you have Mr. Reed, Hugh Grant's character, doing this whole situation, capturing these girls, trying to make them witness a miracle, and he's ultimately this super genius, apparently, that has this giant maze structure in his basement that somehow he crafted, which, fine, it's a movie, I get it, whatever, I don't know how he would have constructed that, but the fact is, I feel like I never get a reason to why he's trying to do this or what he's essentially trying to prove. I know I usually say when we review movies and we have a discussion, I don't always need to know the answer. Sometimes not knowing the answer is absolutely fine. In this case, John, I think I did kind of want a little more from the Mr. Reed character as to why he was doing this, why he was going to such lengths to prove his religion. Like, what was ultimately, the reason here? Because, I don't know, maybe it had something to do with his wife. Again, we're talking about it, so there is a discussion being had about as to why, which ultimately is something you want in your movie, but I wouldn't have minded maybe a few more, like, breadcrumbs to give me some kind of more solid reasoning as to why he went to such lengths to have this happen.
I think... So, one of the scenes that, and this, again, is a spoiler, but one of the scenes that I actually really liked at the very end of the movie is when Hugh Grant's character and Chloe East's character are both kind of seemingly on the verge of death, right?
Right.
And she begins to pray, and she looks very at peace in that moment, and Hugh Grant looks horrified. Right. He looks like tortured. He looks like somebody who is not at peace at all. Right. And I don't know, I'm thinking maybe because the first half of the movie is spent with him proposing all these questions, and did you ever think that your religion was really this, and did you ever think that it took all of its inspiration from this and that it really is meaningless in the end? I think that he was somebody who was trying to, maybe because he says control is kind of the greatest religion, be able to feel like he understood everything and had control of everything, but then that didn't give him any peace in the end.
Right. So, I can see that.
That's kind of how I interpreted it, that he had just built this big structure around him and said, like, I figured it all out. But in the end, he was terrified of death, and this young woman who had faith was not.
Yeah, and I could see that. Again, I think there is some maybe illusion here, especially like the world's best husband mug, like he's always drinking out of. He does mention a wife several times, so maybe there was some kind of damage that was done to him to make him lose his faith and go on ultimately this quest to find the ultimate religion, which, again, this movie does phenomenally. I never would have compared religion to Monopoly, different editions of Monopoly. That whole scene just really had me intrigued, and then especially too with the song comparison as well, as a song being remade over time and the lawsuits happening, and it just keeps slightly changing. But I do like, again, the counter arguments there too. I could see a lot of like the religious nutsos being like, oh, you're talking about one side of the religion, but there is a counter discussion to that, which Sister Barnes, Sophie Thatcher's character, like brilliantly brings out. Like, sure, you're having a discussion about these religions, but you're choosing which facts you want to focus on and leaving all the others out, which again, I think perfectly comes back to, again, that uncle at the dinner table having that discussion about religion and two people going back and forth. Again, this movie really captures that just in a horror thriller sense, if you will. one thing I think also, as we're into these like spoiler discussions here, I think the ending's going to leave a lot of people either satisfied or unsatisfied. I think there is going to be a lot there because this movie doesn't give you a clear answer. How did you feel about the ending, if we want to just talk a little bit about ultimately what happens at the end?
Sure. So you're referring to the basement and then the scene after?
Yeah.
Right. So at the very end of the movie, it's kind of shown to you that Hugh Grant's character has kept women locked up in his basement as part of his new religion. Well, one other thing that I actually wrote this down because I thought it was very interesting. Hugh Grant's character, she stabs him when he is behind her.
Right.
So the way that they're positioned, but she had an opportunity earlier to stab him in the back and doesn't take it. I thought it was kind of an interesting choice to show that, like, even in a life or death situation, that this young woman didn't take, she wasn't getting the jump on anyone or taking advantage of anyone. But long and the short of it is, Hugh Grant's character dies, and Chloe's character escapes, and in a field, a butterfly lands on her in reference to what I thought was interesting, what she said she would want to do if she were to die, not what Sophie Thatcher said she would want to do if she died. And she's the one who actually died, so what was going on there?
Right. And I think it's interesting because then the butterfly disappears. Mm-hmm. So essentially what the movie's alluding to is, ultimately, did Sister Paxton really survive or not? Did she just hallucinate? Because they have a conversation which is it was very strange at the time, and I guess it played on later. Sister Barnes talks about how she almost died having Taco Bell. At one time she was in the hospital, and she said she had this big hallucination before she died. That's how she knew the faking of the there's just I don't want to get too deep into the whole plot scenarios, but there's a scene of seeing a miracle, and that she understands, like, what could have happened, and you could have hallucinated and whatnot, what you saw. Anyway, Sister Barnes, she has a hallucination, and she knows what she does. So when Sister Paxton's almost dying, what do you think? Do you think she truly escaped, John, or do you think it was a hallucination? Because I guess you can come out with either of these scenarios, and both could be potentially correct.
And I guess just like the concept of the movie, it's like an interpretation of things that you're presented that you could take either way, whether you have faith that this character survived or you're being more cynical and saying, oh, it was a trick of the mind, right? I don't know, but I think that if anything is the value of this movie, it's that we've had this long conversation that went all over the place about the movie, and that's very much like the experience of watching the movie, because it's just a long conversation that goes all over the place and has a lot of interesting potential implications. And so, after you said that, I don't really know, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it too, and I enjoyed, even like the 3 nails and the actual wood thing that she hits Mr. Reed with, being like the religious symbolism of the 3 nails of Christ and stuff like that. Again, you can interpret a lot of the religious symbolism is kind of thrown in the movie. One scene I know you really enjoyed was the whole Dante's Inferno scene where they kind of go into that, and it's very well done, and it's not totally shoved in your face. It's kind of left to you to kind of interpret what actually happens in that scene, which I do appreciate the movie doing as well.
Yeah, there's just so much interesting symbolism, and they will show you kind of images on the wall that get you thinking about it, and then show you story elements or locations that reflect those things. So a lot of cool little Easter eggs in there.
Yeah, again, just a really well-done movie, which for me it kind of feels like it came out of nowhere. I really didn't have too much expectation with this movie, but again, when you cast Hugh Grant in a horror movie, I don't think he's been in a horror movie when I looked since like the 80s or something like that. He was in like one single horror movie or something like that, and then never again. But perfectly cast. This movie's definitely exceptional. I think we've talked enough. Let's give our final scores on this one. I'm going to give The Heretic an 8.7 out of 10.
Missionaries are really just salespeople for an organization. The product you're selling is an idea. You knock on my door and you sell. Maybe I buy, maybe I don't buy. Those are the rules of engagement when I invite you into my house. We are negotiating a transaction of ideologies. And what I'm trying to say to you tonight is that I have an idea which I would like to sell to you.
I think this movie's phenomenal. I think it really is an achievement. I had an excellent time with me. It's creepy, it's sinister, it's a psychological horror, it's a religious discussion. All the performances are phenomenal. I do think, there are some weaknesses as far as, the first half. I think the first half, like you said, we kind of decided this movie's split into two halves. I think the first half is incredibly interesting. Then when we get to the second half, I think it loses a little bit of its, fuel by the end here. I think it becomes a typical horror movie by the end of this movie, and I think I wanted maybe something a little bit more of a payoff. But overall, I think I had a phenomenal time with this. It comes highly recommended from me. John, what do you think on this one?
I think that after our discussion, I would give Heretic an 8.8 out of 10.
Are you asking us for us to deliberate our belief in the church?
That factor which will correspond to us going home?
I'm asking you to choose between belief and disbelief.
I liked this movie quite a bit. I always like it when a movie can try for something unique. You don't see very many movies like this. I know we talked about what was the payphone phone booth movie, where you're limiting yourself to such a small area, such a small cast, and it really puts your actors and your script in focus, and you have to make sure they're good, and they were really good. And I just enjoy seeing something unique like this.
Yeah, and again, we can kind of thank A24 for all its, highs and lows when they put out movies. At least they try something new each time, and they kind of encourage these directors to make these projects that are different. And again, I will argue, I think horror is one of our strongest genres today as far as putting out original ideas and giving us something new. Movie's phenomenal. You gotta check it out. But most importantly, what we need to know, in the comments below, what did you guys think? Did you enjoy this movie? Did you enjoy the religious back and forth? Have you been in those awkward situations before? Let us know in the comments. And, like I said, make sure you tune in for the next video. We got a lot of good stuff coming up for you guys. Again, my name's Kevin. That guy's John. We are your Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. We'll see you guys in the next one.
If you guys like what you've seen here today, consider giving this video a like and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with everything Real Movie Guys related, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, all you audio listeners at home, we are available on many podcasting platforms. Just search The Real Movie Guys, you should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us on this episode of The Real Review. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you next time.